Royal Guard BREAKS protocol to reunite a lost boy with his mother. A truly emotional moment. It was a bright and sunny morning when the palace grounds were filled with the soft hum of excitement. People from all around the city had gathered, eager to witness the grand royal ceremony. The air was alive with chatter, laughter, and the occasional shout of joy from children who ran about in excitement. Flags fluttered gently in the morning breeze, and the guards, dressed in their pristine uniforms, stood tall and motionless along the paths, a symbol of strict discipline and unwavering attention. Their polished boots reflected the sunlight, and their faces were a mixture of pride and seriousness. Everything seemed perfectly orchestrated, a scene of beauty and order. Among the crowd, a young boy named Ion held tightly to his mother's hand. He was no more than 5 years old, his small fingers barely wrapping around hers. Ion's eyes sparkled with curiosity as he tried to take in everything around him: the grand palace gates, the colorful banners, and the crowd that seemed endless. But amid all the excitement, he felt a little overwhelmed. The voices around him were loud, and the sudden commotion of people moving in every direction made him feel dizzy. For a child his age, the grandiosity of the event was both fascinating and intimidating. His mother, Fatima, walked carefully, keeping a close eye on her son. She had been looking forward to this day for weeks. The royal ceremony was a rare opportunity to witness traditions she had only read about in books or seen on television. She wanted her son to enjoy it, to feel the sense of pride and history that surrounded the palace. But even as she tried to keep him close, the crowd was thick, and small accidents were inevitable. People jostled past them, some unintentionally bumping into Ion, who would occasionally stumble and clutch his mother tighter. Each time, Fatima's heart would skip a beat, but she reassured herself that she was doing everything she could to protect him. The excitement of the morning, however, soon turned into a moment of fear. In a brief lapse of attention, Ion's hand slipped from his mother's grasp. He had been distracted by a pair of pigeons fluttering near a fountain and instinctively ran toward them, fascinated by their sudden movements. Before Fatima could react, her son had disappeared from her view. Panic surged through her as she frantically scanned the crowd, calling his name with a voice that trembled. "Ion, Ion, where are you?" Her heart raced, and a wave of fear washed over her. Every passing second felt like an eternity, and the laughter and chatter of the crowd now seemed deafening. Meanwhile, Ion was frozen in confusion. He had turned a corner and found himself in a space between the ceremonial gates and the crowd. The pigeons had flown away, and the unfamiliar faces around him seemed to grow taller and larger with every step. He tried to retrace his steps, but everything looked the same. Panic began to creep in, and he called out for his mother, his small voice trembling with fear. "Mama! Mama!" he shouted, but the sound was swallowed by the sea of people. Tears began to form in his eyes, and he hugged himself as he realized he was alone. Not far from him, the royal guards noticed the small boy wandering near the restricted area. They were trained to maintain strict discipline and to ensure the crowd followed the rules. The guards had been instructed to keep people away from the ceremonial path, to preserve the dignity and order of the event. But this situation was different. The little boy's fear was evident, and even from a distance, one guard could see the distress in his eyes. The guard, whose name was Captain Rahim, felt an immediate sense of responsibility. He had spent years serving at the palace, and he had seen many incidents, but something about this child tugged at his heart in a way that reminded him of his own younger brother. Captain Rahim observed the boy for a moment, assessing the situation. He knew the rules. No one was allowed beyond the designated areas without permission. Any deviation could result in serious reprimand. But he also saw the terror in the boy's eyes, the way his small hands clutched at his clothes, and the way he cried out for his mother. There was no time to wait, no chance to ask for instructions. The instinct to help the child overcame the strict sense of duty that had been drilled into him for years. He took a step forward, his polished boots making a soft thud on the stone path. As Captain Rahim moved closer, the crowd began to notice the small boy and the guard approaching him. People stopped in their tracks, sensing that something unusual was happening. Mothers clutched their own children tighter, and some bystanders whispered to each other, curious about the unfolding scene. Yet no one intervened. There was a silent understanding that this was a delicate moment, one that required compassion rather than judgment. Ion, seeing the approaching figure, initially recoiled. He had been taught to be wary of strangers, but there was something in the guard's demeanor that was different. Captain Rahim knelt down to the boy's level, his voice soft and gentle. "It's okay, little one. I'm here to help you. Where is your mother?" he asked, his words calm and reassuring. Ion sniffled and pointed toward the crowd, trying to explain, but his fear made it hard for him to speak clearly. The guard listened patiently, giving the boy time to regain a sense of trust. Fatima, meanwhile, had been running through the crowd, tears streaming down her face. Her voice grew hoarse as she continued calling out her son's name. Every face she passed was a blur, and every second without him felt unbearable. She feared the worst, that he might be lost forever in the chaos of the crowd. Her heart pounded in her chest, and she felt a mix of desperation and helplessness. Just when she thought she might collapse from fear, she caught sight of a guard kneeling down near a small figure. Her heart leaped. Could it be? Captain Rahim gently took the boy's hand, guiding him through the gaps in the crowd. Ion, though hesitant at first, began to follow, sensing that he was safe. The guard's calm presence was a stark contrast to the overwhelming noise and confusion around them. They moved slowly but steadily, navigating past people and obstacles. Every step brought the child closer to safety, and every passing moment added to the tension of the scene. The crowd, now aware of what was happening, began to part slightly, allowing a small path to form. Some whispered words of encouragement, while others simply watched in awe at the guard's courage and compassion. Finally, Fatima spotted them. Her eyes widened, and a sob of relief escaped her lips. She rushed forward, pushing through the crowd carefully but urgently. When she reached her son, she scooped him into her arms, holding him tightly as if never to let go again. Ion clung to his mother, his tears gradually subsiding as he felt her warmth and protection. The mother and child hugged each other, a powerful moment of love and relief. Captain Rahim stood nearby, a quiet smile on his face, watching the reunion. He had done what he knew was right, even if it meant bending the rules. The crowd around them remained silent for a moment, absorbing the emotional scene. Some people had tears in their eyes, touched by the simple yet profound act of kindness. Others whispered about the bravery of the guard, amazed that someone could put compassion above strict protocol. It was a moment that transcended rules and regulations, a reminder that humanity and empathy could shine even in places governed by rigid structure. After ensuring that the mother and child were safe, Captain Rahim returned to his post, his demeanor calm but proud. He had acted on instinct, guided by the simple principle of doing what was right. The incident would later be remembered not just for the tension of the moment, but for the courage it took to prioritize a human life over formal rules. For Fatima and Ion, the day that began with fear ended with an unforgettable memory, a story of hope, compassion, and the quiet heroism of a man in uniform who chose to care. As the ceremony continued, life returned to its normal pace, but the impact of that morning lingered. The crowd dispersed slowly, carrying with them the story of the small boy and the kind-hearted guard. And for Ion, it was a lesson that even in moments of fear and confusion, there were people willing to step forward and guide him back to safety. After the boy, Ion, was safely reunited with his mother, the atmosphere around the palace was still buzzing with excitement, but the moment left a lingering sense of reflection. Captain Rahim returned to his position near the ceremonial gates, his uniform immaculate, yet his mind was far from calm. He could not shake the feeling of tension that came with what he had done. Rules and protocol were strict at the palace, designed to maintain order, and yet he had stepped beyond them. For years, he had been trained to follow orders precisely, to never act on impulse, and to prioritize the ceremony and its security above all else. Today, however, he had allowed compassion to guide his actions, and it left him in a quiet internal struggle. Rahim's colleagues, other guards who had witnessed the incident, stood silently along the path, some casting subtle glances in his direction. A few of them whispered quietly among themselves, debating whether he had acted correctly. "He shouldn't have broken protocol," one muttered, shaking his head slightly. Another, however, looked on with admiration, "But he saved that child." What else could he have done? The debate lingered in the air, yet no one spoke too loudly. The palace rules dictated respect for hierarchy, and even disagreement had to remain subdued. Rahim, however, did not wait for their judgments. He knew he had done what his heart told him was right, and the sight of Ion safely in his mother's arms was a reward no reprimand could overshadow. Despite this quiet satisfaction, a seed of worry began to grow in Rahim's mind. He knew that someone would report the incident to higher authorities. Breaking protocol, even for a noble reason, could have consequences. Rahim tried to remind himself of the balance between duty and humanity, but doubts lingered. Could he justify his actions in the formal language of regulations? Would his superiors understand that this was not negligence, but an act of courage and empathy? The questions weighed heavily on him as he resumed his post, standing tall, the polished shine of his uniform hiding the storm of thoughts beneath. Meanwhile, Fatima and Ion were slowly walking toward a quieter section of the palace grounds. The crowd had begun to disperse, and the noises of the ceremony faded into the background, replaced by a calmer environment. Fatima held Ion close, feeling the rapid beat of his small heart against her chest. She whispered soft reassurances. "It's okay now, my love. You're safe, I've got you." Ion, still overwhelmed by the earlier fear, buried his face into his mother's shoulder. His tears had dried, but the memory of being lost and alone was still vivid in his mind. Every parent at the palace that day could understand her relief. The fear of losing a child in a crowded, unfamiliar place is unlike any other worry. As they walked, Fatima couldn't help but glance back toward Captain Rahim. She wanted to thank him, to express the gratitude that words could scarcely convey. Yet, before she could approach him directly, he had already shifted back into the professional demeanor required of a royal guard. His movements were precise, his face calm, almost impassive, but his eyes betrayed a warmth that had been present when he had first comforted her son. That brief glance was enough for Fatima to know that this was a man who had acted with pure intention, guided not by rules alone, but by a deep sense of humanity. Back at the ceremonial gate, Rahim remained alert. The royal ceremony continued without interruption, the dignitaries proceeding along the grand path, unaware of the small drama that had unfolded just moments before. He watched the crowd, ensuring that no further incidents occurred. But in his mind, he replayed the scene repeatedly. Each detail, the fear in Ion's eyes, the relief on Fatima's face, the way the child had finally trusted him enough to follow, was etched vividly. Rahim understood the fine line he had walked between protocol and compassion. One wrong step could have caused confusion, even chaos, yet he had managed to navigate it successfully. Still, the thought of the potential consequences haunted him. Rahim's mind wandered further into reflection. He thought about the nature of duty. For years, he had believed that following rules without question was the highest form of service, but today had challenged that belief. Rules existed for safety, order, and predictability, yet they could sometimes be rigid to the point of ignoring human needs. He realized that true service required judgment, courage, and empathy in addition to obedience. It was not enough to simply follow orders. One had to understand the spirit behind them. That understanding, he now knew, could sometimes mean bending the rules for the greater good. As Rahim stood in his post, other guards began to approach him quietly, one by one. They offered nods of acknowledgement, a silent camaraderie that said, "We saw what you did and it mattered." One younger guard, who had been newly assigned, finally spoke up, his voice hushed but filled with admiration. "Sir, you did the right thing." That child, he would have been terrified. Rahim nodded, appreciating the support, though he did not allow himself to relax completely. He knew that the real judgment would come later from the palace authorities, not from his peers. The incident also left Rahim thinking about the broader lessons beyond his personal dilemma. He considered the crowd, the families, and especially the children present that day. How many of them relied on the kindness of strangers in moments of fear? How many children might face situations where no adult immediately notices them? His actions, though small in the grand scale of the royal ceremony, were significant in the context of human connection and compassion. This understanding strengthened his resolve to act with empathy in all future situations, regardless of the rules he might have to navigate. Meanwhile, the story of the reunion slowly began to spread among the crowd and palace staff. Whispers passed from one bystander to another. "Did you see the guard helping the boy?" someone said quietly. "He went beyond protocol just to reunite the child with his mother." Another added, "It was amazing." He didn't have to, but he did. People were moved not just by the emotional reunion, but by the courage and humanity it represented. Many would remember this small incident far more vividly than the grand ceremonies or speeches that morning. The power of empathy, even in a structured and formal environment, resonated deeply with everyone present. Fatima, holding her son, walked slowly to a shaded area where she could rest for a few moments. Ion had calmed down, but he still clung to her hand, reluctant to let go. She spoke softly, reassuring him, telling him that he was safe now, that nothing bad would happen again. Ion, feeling the warmth of his mother's embrace and the lingering presence of the guard who had helped him, finally relaxed completely. In that moment, the fear that had gripped both mother and child seemed distant, replaced by gratitude and relief. For Rahim, the day continued with his duties, but the weight of what had transpired remained with him. He had faced a choice that challenged his understanding of his role as a guard, and he had chosen compassion over strict adherence to protocol. This choice, he realized, was not weakness, it was strength. It took courage to step outside the rigid boundaries of rules, to act on humanity, and to accept the uncertainty of the outcome. He reflected on how small actions, guided by empathy, could make an enormous difference in the lives of others. As the royal ceremony progressed, Rahim remained vigilant, aware that his role was more than just standing guard. It was about ensuring the safety and dignity of everyone present. Yet the incident with Ion had changed something within him. He had experienced firsthand the delicate balance between duty and humanity. Rules and protocols were essential, yes, but they were not absolute. There were moments when the heart must guide actions, and courage must meet compassion. Today had been one of those moments, and it would remain with him forever. Later, as the ceremony concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Rahim allowed himself a brief moment of quiet reflection. The tension that had occupied him since the incident slowly began to fade, replaced by a deep sense of fulfillment. He had acted in a way that aligned with both his training and his humanity, and that rare harmony brought him pride. As he watched families leaving the palace grounds, he felt a renewed understanding of his role, not merely as a protector of rules and traditions, but as a guardian of people, capable of kindness, courage, and empathy. The morning, which had begun as an ordinary royal event, had transformed into a story that would be remembered by those present. A small boy had been reunited with his mother, and a guard had shown the power of humanity within a structured, disciplined world. The incident reminded everyone that courage comes in many forms, not always in grand gestures, but often in the quiet, compassionate actions that make life safer and kinder for those in need. And as Rahim stood once more at his post, the sun casting long shadows across the palace grounds, he felt a calm certainty. Today had tested his understanding of duty and protocol, and he had passed, not by following rules blindly, but by listening to the call of empathy and acting with a heart as strong as his training. The memory of the boy's tears, the mother's relief, and the subtle nods of appreciation from the crowd would stay with him always, a guiding light for the moments yet to come. The day continued at the palace with its usual rhythm, yet the earlier incident with little Ion lingered in the minds of many. Captain Rahim, though appearing composed, could not shake the thoughts of what had just occurred. He had acted with courage and empathy, yet the weight of breaking protocol remained heavy on his mind. Every step he took, every turn of his head reminded him that while he had done the right thing for the child, the rules of the palace were strict. The uncertainty of what would follow, whether praise, reprimand, or criticism, kept him alert and thoughtful. Meanwhile, Fatima and Ion had moved to a quieter section of the palace grounds to regain composure. Ion, though safe in his mother's arms, was still visibly shaken. His small hands gripped hers tightly as he tried to process the overwhelming series of events. For a child, such moments leave lasting impressions, and Fatima knew it was her responsibility to soothe him. She whispered softly, repeating reassurances and letting him feel the calm in her voice. "It's okay, my love. You are safe now. I'm here and I won't let anything happen to you." Ion's tears had slowed, but the fear in his eyes remained. As Fatima sat on a nearby bench, holding her son, she could not help but reflect on the moment that had saved them. She kept thinking about the guard who had reached out to her son when all seemed lost. Captain Rahim had risked the disapproval of his superiors and broken strict palace rules, yet he acted without hesitation. To Fatima, this was not just an act of duty. It was a demonstration of true humanity. She had seen many events at the palace, watched countless ceremonial performances, and yet nothing had moved her like the courage and compassion of that single guard. Back at his post, Rahim remained observant. His colleagues occasionally glanced at him, noting the serious expression on his face. Some were quietly impressed, while others were unsure how to feel about what had occurred. There was an unspoken tension in the air, a balance between admiration for the courage shown and concern over the breach of rules. Rahim's mind wandered over every detail of his actions, questioning if there had been a better way to manage the situation. He understood the significance of his decision. A single moment of empathy had created a story that would be remembered for a long time. As the ceremony continued, a new challenge emerged. Ion, though calmed, had not fully regained his sense of security. The crowd, though thinning, remained present, and the palace grounds were filled with the sounds of ceremonial music and footsteps echoing across stone paths. The presence of so many unfamiliar faces, combined with the formal environment, kept the child anxious. Fatima knew that the key now was to create a sense of comfort and stability for him. She kept talking gently, guiding him through the remaining areas and teaching him to take small, steady steps rather than rushing, which might trigger further panic. Meanwhile, Rahim had received word from a colleague that there had been murmurs among the palace staff regarding his actions. It seemed the story of his intervention had traveled quickly through the corridors of the palace. Some staff members admired his courage, noting that he had acted in the child's best interest. Others questioned whether his decision had overstepped boundaries. Rahim did not feel defensive. Instead, he reflected quietly, realizing that leadership and judgment often required navigating gray areas where strict rules did not account for human emotions. This understanding strengthened his resolve, even as he remained cautious of potential repercussions. In another part of the palace, a small group of onlookers had begun to discuss the incident. Parents shared their own experiences of losing sight of their children in crowded spaces, connecting with Fatima's visible fear and relief. Children watched, wide-eyed, observing how a single person could make such a difference in the life of another. The story of Rahim's act spread not through formal announcements, but through whispers, shared emotions, and quiet admiration. Each retelling highlighted the tension between strict protocol and human compassion, emphasizing how bravery could appear in small, everyday actions. Back with Fatima and Ion, the mother began to notice the lasting impact of the incident on her son. He clung to her, occasionally glancing around, wary of the large crowd and unfamiliar surroundings. Fatima understood that though the immediate danger had passed, the memory of feeling lost and alone was something that would stay with him. She decided to use this moment as a teaching opportunity, gently explaining how to stay close to trusted adults in crowded places, and reassuring him that brave people like Captain Rahim were always willing to help. Her words were calm, soft, and filled with hope, allowing Ion to regain a sense of security. Meanwhile, Rahim faced a personal test. His role required him to observe and maintain control of the palace grounds, and yet he could not ignore the lingering questions in his mind. He reflected on what it meant to act with courage, even when it meant stepping beyond established rules. His training emphasized discipline, precision, and obedience, but it had never fully accounted for the unpredictable nature of human emotions. Today, he realized, true professionalism required more than following instructions. It demanded empathy, quick thinking, and the moral courage to act rightly even when consequences were uncertain. As the day wore on, Fatima and Ion slowly made their way toward the exit, taking care not to rush and cause any further distress. Every step was deliberate, measured, and filled with the lingering awareness of the incident. Ion, though more relaxed, kept a small grip on his mother's hand, finding comfort in her presence. Fatima, meanwhile, observed his cautious movements, understanding the delicate balance of guiding him toward normalcy while respecting the impact of his earlier fear. She knew that the reunion, though joyful, was only part of the healing process for her son. At the same time, Rahim remained at his post, ensuring that no other incidents occurred. He moved with a calm precision, aware of his surroundings, yet internally he continued to reflect on the implications of his decision. Breaking protocol had been necessary, he believed, yet it had exposed him to scrutiny. He understood that leadership, empathy, and courage were intertwined, and that the measure of a true guard was not only in following rules, but also in protecting people, even when the rules might complicate that mission. The lessons from today would remain with him forever. As the afternoon sun began to descend, casting long shadows across the palace grounds, the story of the reunion continued to spread quietly. Observers shared what they had seen with friends and family, emphasizing the bravery of the guard, who had prioritized the child's safety over strict adherence to rules. Many were touched not only by the emotional reunion, but also by the reminder that small acts of courage and kindness could have profound effects. It was a lesson that resonated deeply. Heroism is not always about grand gestures. Sometimes it is found in the quiet, decisive actions of a single person in the right moment. Fatima, now seated on a bench with Ion resting against her, could not stop thinking about the guard. She wanted to express her gratitude in a meaningful way, yet she understood that he had responsibilities to uphold. Even so, the sincerity of her appreciation was evident in her gaze and the small nod she gave in his direction as he passed by. Rahim, noticing the acknowledgement, allowed a faint, understanding smile to cross his face. That simple exchange, unspoken yet profound, conveyed more than words ever could. It was a connection forged in a moment of crisis, a bond created through empathy, courage, and trust. Meanwhile, Rahim's thoughts returned to the broader implications of the day. He considered how his actions might influence others in similar situations, how small decisions made in moments of urgency could inspire courage, empathy, and responsibility. He also reflected on how human connection transcends rules and formalities, reminding him that true service is about understanding people, responding to their needs, and protecting them with both heart and discipline. The balance between duty and compassion, he realized, was the true measure of his profession. As the palace grounds began to quiet, the emotional impact of the incident remained palpable. Ion clung to his mother, learning in subtle ways about trust, safety, and the kindness of strangers. Fatima felt a deep sense of gratitude, not only for the guard's intervention, but for the lessons her son was absorbing. She understood that while the incident had been frightening, it had also provided an invaluable opportunity for growth, reflection, and a reminder of humanity's potential for courage and empathy. Finally, as the day drew to a close, Rahim took a brief moment to himself, standing in the soft light of the setting sun. He reflected on the tension he had faced, the choice to act beyond protocol, and the resulting reunion of mother and child. He understood that life would continue with its rules, regulations, and expectations, but that there would always be moments requiring courage, judgment, and empathy. Today had been one of those moments, and the memory of Ion's tearful relief, Fatima's gratitude, and the silent admiration of the crowd would remain with him forever, shaping the way he approached his duty in the future. The palace ceremony had gone on without further incident, yet the story of the guard and the lost child became a quiet legend among those present. It reminded everyone that heroism is often found in the intersection of duty and humanity, and that true courage is measured not only by strict adherence to rules, but by the willingness to act rightly when faced with fear, uncertainty, and the chance to make a real difference in someone's life. For Rahim, for Fatima, and for Ion, the day would remain etched in memory, a story of bravery, compassion, and the extraordinary power of ordinary actions performed with a kind heart. As the afternoon faded into evening, the palace grounds grew quieter. Families who had attended the ceremony began to leave, carrying with them memories of the day. The laughter of children, the clatter of footsteps on stone paths, and the soft rustle of flags in the breeze gradually gave way to a calm stillness. Yet amidst this fading activity, a sense of reflection lingered in the air. For Captain Rahim, Fatima, and little Ion, the day's events had left an imprint far deeper than the ceremony itself. Rahim remained at his post, standing tall as the sun cast long shadows across the palace courtyard. Though outwardly composed, his thoughts were active and reflective. He thought about the choices he had made, the rules he had temporarily set aside, and the courage it had taken to act swiftly in a delicate situation. For years, he had followed protocol without question, believing that strict adherence to rules was the truest measure of duty. But today, he had realized that rules alone could not account for human emotion, fear, and the need for compassion. True service required balancing discipline with empathy, and that understanding had transformed him in ways he could scarcely articulate. As Rahim observed the now emptying grounds, he noticed families walking by with children in their arms, guiding them carefully as if silently acknowledging the lessons of the day. It occurred to him that every parent there would have understood the depth of his actions, the relief of a mother reunited with her child, the small hand gripping a comforting presence, the immense trust placed in a stranger's care. These were moments that could never be captured fully by ceremony, tradition, or protocol. They existed in quiet human experience, powerful because of their simplicity and sincerity. Meanwhile, Fatima and Ayan had settled on a quiet bench beneath a large tree. The gentle rustle of leaves and the fading light of the sun created a calm, safe environment, allowing both mother and child to breathe fully after the intense events of the day. Fatima held her son close, brushing away the last traces of tears from his cheeks. "You're safe now, my love," she whispered softly. Ayan looked up at her, his small face still marked with worry, yet softened by the comfort of her presence. He had learned a small but important lesson. Even in moments of fear, there are people willing to help, people willing to act courageously to protect others. The mother's thoughts, however, remained focused on Captain Rahim. She wanted to express her gratitude, to convey in words what she felt in her heart, but the palace environment made it difficult. She knew that Rahim had duties to uphold and could not linger for personal thanks. Even so, she watched him discreetly, noting his composed posture, the professionalism that still guided his movements, and the quiet dignity in the way he carried himself. In her mind, he was not merely a guard. He was a hero, a man who had bridged the gap between rules and humanity to create a moment of profound connection. As evening settled further, Rahim finally had a brief opportunity to step away from his post. In the quiet, he reflected deeply on the lessons of the day. He thought about Ayan's fear, the boy's vulnerability, and the overwhelming sense of relief on Fatima's face. He realized that courage is not always measured in grand gestures or acts of bravery in extreme circumstances. Often, it is found in the small, deliberate actions that respond to the needs of others with empathy and care. His decision to act, though it had involved bending protocol, had created a ripple effect that touched many lives, reminding him of the power of human connection. At the same time, Fatima and Ayan slowly began to leave the palace grounds, hand in hand. Every step they took was measured, deliberate, and filled with a new sense of security. Ayan, though still cautious, had begun to smile slightly, his fear replaced by a budding sense of trust in the kindness of others. Fatima's mind was filled with gratitude, not only for the guard's immediate assistance, but for the lessons embedded in the experience. She understood that her son had witnessed a moment of courage and compassion, one that would shape his understanding of humanity for years to come. As the story of the incident began to spread quietly among palace staff and attendees, it took on a life of its own. People shared what they had seen with friends and family, marveling at the bravery of Captain Rahim and the emotional reunion of mother and child. The incident became a symbol of the balance between duty and empathy, a reminder that heroism often resides in ordinary actions performed with extraordinary care. For the palace staff, it became a talking point, a quiet yet profound lesson in the importance of compassion within structured systems. Later, in a small administrative office within the palace, Rahim met with his superiors. He had anticipated this meeting, aware that his actions might be questioned. Yet he faced it with calm confidence, prepared to explain the reasoning behind his choice. He described the situation carefully, emphasizing the immediate danger to the child and the emotional urgency that required swift action. As he spoke, he noted the attentive expressions of his superiors, who listened closely, weighing the details of the incident against the rigid expectations of protocol. After a moment of silence, one of the senior officers spoke. "Captain Rahim, your actions today were unconventional, but they demonstrated remarkable judgment and humanity. While rules are essential, it is equally important to recognize moments that require compassion and courage. You acted with both restraint and empathy, ensuring the safety of the child without compromising the overall security of the event." Rahim felt a quiet sense of relief wash over him. The acknowledgement affirmed that his instincts had been correct, and that true service was about understanding the spirit behind the rules, not merely following them blindly. The recognition from his superiors was formal but meaningful. Rahim returned to his duties with a renewed sense of purpose, aware that his actions had made a real difference. Beyond the praise or acknowledgement, the emotional impact of the day lingered. He thought about the boy and his mother, the brief, powerful moment of trust and connection, and the ripple effect it had on everyone who had witnessed it. It reinforced the belief that compassion, courage, and empathy are essential components of leadership and service, guiding individuals in ways that rigid rules cannot. Meanwhile, Fatima and Ayan made their way home. Ayan, holding tightly to his mother's hand, reflected in his own small way on the experience. He remembered the fear, the confusion, and then the relief when the guard had appeared. Though he was young, he absorbed a subtle but powerful lesson, that there are people in the world who act selflessly to help others, even when it is not required, and that courage can be quiet, patient, and deeply human. Fatima observed him, realizing that the day had been a transformative experience for both of them. Over the following days, the story of Captain Rahim's intervention spread beyond the palace grounds. Local communities, friends of the family, and even media channels shared the tale of the guard who had broken protocol to reunite a lost boy with his mother. The narrative resonated widely because it highlighted a universal truth. The courage to act with empathy transcends rules, hierarchy, and formal expectations. People were inspired not only by the reunion itself, but by the reminder that small acts of kindness and bravery can leave lasting impressions. For Rahim, the story's growing attention was both humbling and affirming. He did not seek recognition or reward, yet he understood the value of the example his actions had set. Each retelling reinforced the importance of listening to one's instincts, acting with compassion, and prioritizing humanity when faced with difficult choices. The incident became a personal touchstone, a reminder that even within structured systems, individual decisions guided by empathy can create extraordinary outcomes. Fatima, too, carried the memory of the day with her. She shared the story with friends, relatives, and her community, emphasizing not only the reunion but the courage and compassion that had made it possible. For her, it was more than a tale of a lost child. It was a lesson in human goodness, in the power of stepping beyond one's comfort to help another in need. She hoped that by sharing the story, others might recognize moments in their own lives where kindness and courage could make a difference. For Ayan, the experience became a foundational memory. Though he was young, the emotional intensity of being lost and then rescued would remain with him for years. He would remember the calm voice of the guard, the reassurance of his mother, and the overwhelming relief of safety. That memory would quietly shape his understanding of trust, empathy, and the importance of helping others when they are in need. In his own way, the young boy learned that even in a world filled with rules and structure, human connection and courage can guide the way. As time passed, the palace continued its regular schedule of ceremonies and events, but the story of that day remained quietly alive among staff and visitors. It became an example of the balance between discipline and compassion, a reminder that rules exist to serve humanity, not to hinder it. And for Captain Rahim, the memory of Ayan's tearful reunion, Fatima's heartfelt gratitude, and the subtle acknowledgement from his peers became an enduring source of purpose. It reaffirmed his belief that true heroism often comes in the form of small, thoughtful actions performed at precisely the right moment. The day, which had begun like any other, concluded with a sense of fulfillment and quiet reflection for all involved. Captain Rahim returned to his post with renewed clarity about the role of empathy within duty. Fatima and Ayan carried home a story that would be shared for years, one that spoke of courage, kindness, and the extraordinary impact of ordinary people. And though the palace grounds returned to their normal rhythm, the lesson remained timeless. That humanity, compassion, and the courage to act rightly are the qualities that leave the deepest and most lasting marks on the world. As night fell over the city, Rahim finally allowed himself a moment of quiet rest. He looked toward the palace gates, thinking about the child, the mother, and the thousands of people who had witnessed the subtle but profound act of bravery. He felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that he had acted with integrity, empathy, and courage. And in that peaceful moment, he understood something essential. That rules guide us, but it is our humanity that defines us, shapes us, and allows us to make a real difference in the lives of others.